He thought it was just a small-town crush, a lonely mechanic, working hard to raise his daughter, finally taking a chance. She seemed like just another struggling soul, until one rainy night, over pie and coffee, she drops a secret that changes everything. She owns it all, every diner, every paycheck, every decision that could save or destroy on this town. But when powerful forces move in to take it away, her secret isn't the only thing on the line. Will they fight together to save the heart of their town or lose everything trying? Before we get into the story, comment below where in the world you are watching from today. The morning sun crept through the dusty windows of Walker's Auto Repair, casting long shadows across the concrete floor. Charlie Walker wiped his hands on the red shop rag that had seen better days, just like most things in his life. The old radio on his workbench crackled with country music, providing a familiar backdrop to the clink of tools and the whir of machinery. "Dad, did you forget your lunch again?" Emily's voice echoed through the garage, making Charlie smile, despite himself. His daughter bounded in, her backpack slung over one shoulder, holding up a brown paper bag like it was evidence in a trial. "I was going to grab something later," Charlie said, knowing full well he'd probably work straight through lunch if she hadn't shown up. Emily rolled her eyes, a gesture that reminded him so much of her mother it made his heart ache. "You mean you were going to drink coffee all day and pretend that counts as food?" She set the bag down on his workbench, carefully avoiding the grease spots. At 16, Emily had her mother's practical nature and kind heart, mixed with a dash of teenage sass that kept Charlie on his toes. "Speaking of coffee," Emily said, a mischievous glint in her eye, "I saw Miss Grace at the diner yesterday." "She asked about you." Charlie focused intently on organizing his socket wrenches, trying to hide the slight flush in his cheeks. "Did she need her car looked at?" "Dad." Emily's tone was equal parts exasperation and affection. "She doesn't need an excuse to ask about you, and you don't need an excuse to ask her out." "Emily," Charlie sighed, running a hand through his graying hair. "It's not that simple." "Why not? Mom would want you to be happy." Emily's voice softened. "It's been 8 years, Dad." Charlie looked around his shop, the worn tools, the ancient lift that groaned every time he raised a car, the stack of bills in his office drawer that seemed to grow taller each month. "I'm doing okay," he said. "We're doing okay." "Being okay isn't the same as being happy," Emily countered. She glanced at her phone and grabbed her backpack. "I've got to get to school. Promise me you'll at least think about it?" "I promise," Charlie said, pulling her into a quick hug, careful not to get grease on her clothes. "Now get going before you're late." After Emily left, Charlie found himself walking the 3 blocks to Hearth. The bell above the door chimed as he entered, and the familiar scent of coffee and fresh-baked biscuits wrapped around him like a warm blanket. Grace Thompson stood behind the counter, her gray-streaked dark hair pulled back in a neat bun, laugh lines crinkling at the corners of her eyes as she chatted with a customer. She looked up when Charlie entered, and her smile brightened. "Morning, Charlie," she called out. "The usual?" "Please," he nodded, settling onto his regular stool at the counter. He watched as Grace moved with practiced ease, pouring his coffee just the way he liked it, black, with just a hint of sugar. A man in a worn military jacket shuffled in, taking a seat in the corner booth. Charlie recognized him as one of the local veterans who sometimes did odd jobs around town. Grace caught Charlie's eye briefly, then walked over to the man's table. She returned to the counter a few minutes later, and Charlie noticed she'd brought the veteran a coffee and a plate of eggs, though he hadn't ordered anything. "Put it on my tab," Charlie said quietly. Grace shook her head. "Already taken care of," she replied with a gentle smile. "Some things are more important than money." Charlie felt something warm spread through his chest that had nothing to do with the coffee. He'd seen Grace do this before, small acts of kindness when she thought no one was looking. It reminded him of Sarah, his late wife, who'd always found ways to help others even when they were struggling themselves. The morning rush kept Grace busy, but she still found moments to stop and chat with Charlie between refilling coffee cups and taking orders. They talked about Emily's upcoming school play, the unseasonably warm weather, and Mrs. Henderson's temperamental Buick that Charlie had fixed last week. When it was time to head back to the shop, Charlie left his usual tip and an extra $1, which he knew Grace would add to her unofficial fund for customers who couldn't afford a hot meal. The rest of the day passed in a blur of oil changes and brake repairs. As night fell, Charlie found himself lying in bed, staring at the ceiling. The street lamp outside cast a soft glow through his window, creating patterns on the wall that seemed to dance with his thoughts. "Just ask her out for coffee," he mumbled to himself, then chuckled at the irony. They already had coffee together almost every morning. "Would you like to have dinner sometime?" he practiced, then grimaced. Too formal. "Hey, Grace. I was wondering." He rolled over, punching his pillow into a more comfortable shape. "I was wondering if maybe—" The ceiling offered no suggestions, and the street lamp continued its silent vigil as Charlie rehearsed different versions of the same question, none of them feeling quite right. 8 years was a long time to be out of practice, and the thought of dating again made his stomach do strange flips. But Emily's words from that morning echoed in his mind. "Mom would want you to be happy." He knew she was right. Sarah had made him promise, in those final days, to not close himself off from love forever. Charlie lay there in the quiet of his small bedroom, watching the play of light and shadow, thinking about Grace's kind smile and the way she slipped extra biscuits onto his plate when she thought he wasn't looking. He thought about second chances and the courage it takes to reach for them. The windshield wipers squeaked across Charlie's truck window as he pulled into the Hearth parking lot. The steady drizzle had turned the evening sky a deeper shade of gray, and puddles reflected the diner's warm lights like mirrors on the asphalt. He checked his reflection in the rearview mirror, running a hand through his hair that was starting to show more silver than brown these days. "Come on, Walker," he muttered to himself. "You've rebuilt entire engines. This is just dinner." But his hand still trembled slightly as he reached for the door handle. The rain immediately soaked into his jacket as he made his way to the diner's entrance, the neon open sign casting a red glow through the droplets. The familiar bell chimed as he stepped inside, bringing with him the fresh scent of rain and the last bits of daylight. Grace looked up from where she was refilling the sugar dispensers, her face brightening with recognition. "Charlie, you're early today," she said, reaching for a clean mug. "And soaked to the bone. Let me get you some coffee to warm up." He stood there dripping on the checkered floor, suddenly very aware of his wet shoes squeaking against the linoleum. "Thanks, Grace. Actually, I closed the shop early today. Thought I might." The words stuck in his throat like a rusty bolt. Grace set the coffee pot down and leaned against the counter, giving him her full attention. Her gray-streaked hair was coming loose from its bun, creating a soft frame around her face. "Everything okay? You look worried." Charlie slid onto his usual stool, grateful for the familiar perch. "No, everything's fine." "Great, actually." He wrapped his hands around the warm mug she placed before him. I was wondering." A truck driver at the far end of the counter called out for a refill, and Grace held up one finger to Charlie. "Just a second," she said, grabbing the coffee pot. Charlie watched her move down the counter, chatting easily with the customers as she poured coffee and cleared plates. She had a way of making everyone feel special, remembered. She knew the truck driver's name was Bill, that he had 3 kids in college, that he always took the northern route to Denver. When she returned, Charlie took a deep breath. "Grace, I was wondering if maybe you'd like to have dinner sometime?" The words came out in a rush, like air from a punctured tire. Grace's hand stilled on the counter, and for a moment that felt like an eternity, Charlie's heart hammered in his chest. Then she smiled, a real smile that reached her eyes and made them crinkle at the corners. "I'd love to," she said simply. Charlie let out the breath he'd been holding. "Really?" "Really." She glanced at the clock on the wall. "Actually, my shift ends in 20 minutes. If you don't mind waiting, we could have dinner right here. Unless you had somewhere else in mind." "Here's perfect," Charlie said quickly, relief flooding through him. I'll wait right here." True to her word, 20 minutes later, Grace emerged from the back, her apron gone, her hair freshly smoothed back. She slid into the booth across from Charlie, now a customer instead of a server. The evening shift waitress, Jenny, brought them menus with a knowing smile. They ordered meatloaf for him, chicken pot pie for her, and fell into easy conversation about their days. Charlie told her about fixing Mrs. Henderson's Buick again, third time this month, and Grace shared stories about the morning rush. It felt natural, comfortable, like they'd been doing this for years. As they were finishing their meal, Grace's expression turned thoughtful. She pushed her empty plate aside and folded her hands on the table. "Charlie, there's something I should tell you. I haven't been entirely honest about who I am." Charlie's fork paused halfway to his mouth. "What do you mean?" "I'm not just a waitress here," she said carefully. I own Hearth, the whole chain." Charlie set his fork down slowly. "The whole chain? As in all of them?" Grace nodded. "My father started the company 30 years ago. When he passed away, I inherited his majority share. But I didn't want to be just another corporate owner who never sees the inside of their own restaurants. So I started working shifts at different locations, getting to know the staff, the customers, the communities." She gestured around the diner. "I've been here in Willow Creek for 8 months now." Charlie sat back, processing this information. The woman who'd been serving him coffee all these months, who slipped extra biscuits onto his plate and helped out struggling veterans, owned a restaurant chain worth millions. He looked down at his worn hands, the perpetual traces of engine grease under his nails that never quite washed away. "That's quite a secret," he managed. "Does it change things?" Grace asked softly, uncertainty creeping into her voice for the first time that evening. Charlie thought about it for a moment, really thought about it. He looked at Grace, not Grace the millionaire business owner, but Grace who remembered how everyone took their coffee, who had a kind word for every person who walked through the door, who worked long hours on her feet when she didn't have to. "No," he said finally, surprising himself with how much he meant it. "No, it doesn't change anything important." The tension in Grace's shoulders eased. "I'm glad," she said. "I've grown to care about this place, about the people here, about you," she added quietly. The rain had slowed to a gentle patter against the windows when they finally stood to leave. Charlie insisted on paying for dinner, and Grace let him, understanding that some things mattered more than money. They stood under the awning outside the diner, the neon signs casting multicolored reflections in the puddles at their feet. "I'd like to see you again," Charlie said. "If you want to, that is." "I'd like that very much," Grace replied, her smile warm enough to chase away the evening chill. Charlie drove home through the wet streets, streetlights creating halos in the mist. His heart felt lighter than it had in years, even with the knowledge of Grace's true identity settling in his mind. There was something both terrifying and wonderful about this feeling, like standing on the edge of something new and unexpected. The morning sun streamed through the dusty windows of Walker's Auto Repair, casting long shadows across the concrete floor. Charlie was already elbow-deep in an old Chevy's engine when he heard the distinctive crunch of tires on gravel outside. He straightened up, wiping his hands on a rag, expecting his first scheduled customer of the day. Instead, through the open garage door, he saw Grace stepping out of a modest sedan, carrying a paper bag that filled the air with the sweet smell of fresh baking. His heart did a little skip, remembering their dinner from the night before. "Good morning," she called out, navigating carefully around the various tools and parts scattered across the workshop floor. She wore simple jeans and a light blue sweater instead of her usual diner uniform. "I thought you might like some breakfast. These just came out of the oven." Charlie felt suddenly self-conscious about the grease stains on his coveralls. "You didn't have to do that." he said, but couldn't help smiling as she set the bag down on his workbench. I wanted to, Grace replied, opening the bag to reveal golden brown muffins studded with blueberries. Besides, I had an early meeting with some corporate folks over video chat. After dealing with spreadsheets and projections all morning, I needed to see a friendly face. Charlie pulled up 2 shop stools, clearing away some spark plugs to make space. Sounds complicated, he said, taking a muffin. It was still warm. Grace sat down, her expression growing slightly distant. It can be. I travel quite a bit for business. Board meetings, checking on different locations, that sort of thing. She paused, seeming to choose her words carefully. Actually, I'll be heading to Chicago next week for a few days. Charlie nodded, trying not to show his disappointment. Must be hard, being on the road so much. It can be lonely, Grace admitted, then quickly added, but it's necessary. And I do love visiting our different locations, meeting the staff, seeing how each diner becomes part of its community. She changed the subject, gesturing at the Chevy. What are you working on? Before Charlie could answer, the rumble of another engine announced a new arrival. An old pickup truck puttered into the lot, its exhaust coughing badly. Behind the wheel sat Joe Miller, a Vietnam veteran Charlie had known for years. Morning, Charlie? Joe called out as he climbed stiffly from the cab. Think you can take a look at this old girl? She's not running right. Of course, Joe. Give me just a minute to finish up here and… But… Grace was already moving toward Joe, her face lighting up with recognition. Mr. Miller, I didn't know you came to Charlie's shop. Joe's weathered face broke into a smile. Well, if it isn't my favorite coffee pourer. Charlie's the only mechanic I trust with my truck. Been coming here since before his hair went gray. Grace laughed, then noticed Joe rubbing his knee. Without missing a beat, she pulled up another stool. Here, sit down while Charlie takes a look. How's your granddaughter doing? Sarah, right? Last time you were in, you mentioned she was applying to colleges. Charlie watched as Joe settled onto the stool, his usual gruff demeanor softening as he talked about his granddaughter's achievements. Grace listened intently, asking questions that showed she'd been paying attention to every conversation they'd had at the diner. While Charlie checked the truck's timing belt, he could hear them chatting about everything from Sarah's scholarship applications to Joe's physical therapy progress. Grace even remembered the name of Joe's service dog who had passed away last winter. You know, Joe said as Charlie finished up the inspection, it does an old man's heart good to see folks like you two looking out for this town. We need more of that these days. Grace's cheeks colored slightly, but before she could respond, her phone buzzed. Checking it, she sighed. I'm sorry, I have another meeting in 20 minutes, but Charlie. She turned to him, her eyes bright. The diner's hosting a community pancake breakfast this Saturday. Would you and Emily like to come? It's nothing fancy, just a chance for everyone to get together. We'd love to, Charlie said without hesitation, his heart warming at the way her face lit up at his answer. Wonderful. It starts at 8. She gathered her purse, then paused. Oh, and Joe? Bring Sarah if she's home this weekend. I'd love to hear about those college visits firsthand. After she left, Joe watched her car pull away. That's a special lady, Charlie. Don't see many business owners who care like that anymore. Charlie nodded, thinking about how naturally Grace had fit into his workshop, how easily she connected with people like Joe. Yeah, he said softly, she really is. Saturday morning arrived clear and crisp. The Hearth parking lot was already filling up when Charlie and Emily arrived, the diner's windows steamy from all the cooking inside. The bell chimed as they entered, and the familiar space had been transformed. Tables had been pushed together to create long communal seating, and the air was thick with the smell of coffee and maple syrup. Grace moved through the crowd in her apron, carrying plates and stopping to chat with everyone she passed. She wasn't just serving food. She was building connections, remembering details about people's lives, introducing neighbors who might not have met before. Dad, Emily whispered, nudging him. You're staring. Charlie blinked, realizing he had indeed been watching Grace. But it wasn't just her he was seeing, it was the way she brought the whole room to life. How she'd created this space where a retired teacher could share stories with a young mother, where kids could color while their parents caught up with old friends, where someone like Joe could feel valued and remembered. Grace caught his eye across the room and waved, her smile brightening even further. She made her way over, somehow managing to carry 3 plates of pancakes without spilling a drop. "I'm so glad you both came," she said, setting the plates down. "Emily, I made sure to add extra chocolate chips to yours. Your dad mentioned they're your favorite." Emily beamed. "Thanks, Grace. This is amazing. Look how many people showed up." "That's what community is all about," Grace said, gesturing at the crowded diner. "Sometimes people just need a reason to come together." A burst of laughter drew their attention to a table where Joe was apparently telling one of his famous fishing stories to a group of teenagers, including his granddaughter Sarah. The young people were actually listening, engaged and amused rather than buried in their phones. Charlie watched Grace watching the scene, saw the genuine joy in her expression as she took in the connections being formed over simple pancakes and coffee. In that moment, he understood something profound about her, that despite her wealth and position, what truly mattered to her was right here, in this room, in these small moments of human connection. She caught him watching and tilted her head questioningly. "Everything okay?" "Yeah," he said softly. "Everything's perfect." The black Mercedes stood out like a sore thumb among the pickup trucks and well-worn sedans that usually filled the Hearth parking lot. Its glossy finish and tinted windows caught the morning sun, drawing curious glances from the regulars inside. Charlie was underneath Mrs. Peterson's ancient Buick when Emily burst into the garage, still wearing her school backpack. "Dad, did you see that fancy car at the diner?" She was practically bouncing with excitement. "Everyone's talking about it. Jenny's mom works in the kitchen, and she says some big-shot businessman from the city showed up asking for Grace." Charlie rolled out from under the car, wiping his hands on a shop rag. "That right?" He tried to keep his voice casual, but something tight formed in his chest. "Yeah, and get this, he was wearing this super expensive suit, like movie star expensive." Jenny's mom said he looked totally out of place ordering coffee. The morning wore on and more snippets of gossip trickled in with each customer. Sarah, who worked the morning shift at the diner, mentioned the man's name when she brought Charlie his usual lunch order, Philip Marston. Some kind of corporate developer. Grace took him to her office. "You know that back room she never uses?" Sarah's voice dropped to a whisper. "They've been in there for hours." Betty from the kitchen says she heard something about buying properties when she walked past. Charlie's sandwich sat untouched as he watched more expensive cars pull into the diner's lot throughout the afternoon. Men and women in business attire filed in and out, their faces serious as they consulted phones and tablets. Around closing time, Charlie couldn't shake his unease. He walked over to the diner, telling himself he just wanted his usual evening coffee. The bell chimed as he entered, but the familiar warmth of the place felt different somehow. 2 waitresses huddled near the coffee maker, their voices low but worried. "Said they're looking at all the small-town locations. I'd heard they want to put in one of those fancy chain restaurants instead. What about our jobs? I've got kids to feed." They fell silent when they noticed Charlie, offering weak smiles before busying themselves with work. He settled into his usual booth, watching the closed office door at the back of the diner. When it finally opened, a tall man in an impeccable gray suit emerged first. Philip Marston carried himself with the confidence of someone used to getting his way, his smile practiced and sharp. Grace followed, looking tired but composed in a way Charlie hadn't seen before, more businesswoman than waitress. "We'll be in touch about those projections," Marston was saying. "The board is very interested in moving quickly on this opportunity." He checked his expensive watch. "I'll have my team send over the preliminary paperwork tomorrow." Grace nodded, shaking his hand. "Thank you for coming all this way, Philip. I'll review everything carefully." After Marston left, Grace noticed Charlie. Something flickered across her face. Guilt? Worry? Before she managed a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. Charlie, I didn't expect to see you this late. Figured I'd stop by for coffee. He gestured to the chair across from him. Got a minute? She glanced at the office door, then back at him. I should really finish up some work. Grace. His voice was gentle but firm. What's going on? The whole town's buzzing about men in suits and secret meetings. She sank into the chair, suddenly looking exhausted. It's complicated, Charlie. Try me. Grace ran a hand through her hair, a gesture he'd never seen from her before. The board, my partners in the company, they've been pushing for changes. They think some of our smaller locations aren't profitable enough. And this Marston fellow? What's his role in all this? Philip represents a development group. They're interested in buying several properties, including this one. They want to create what they call a dining destination, something more upscale, more modern. Charlie felt like someone had punched him in the gut. You're considering selling the diner? This diner? It's not that simple. Grace's voice took on a defensive edge. There are financial realities, pressure from investors. The board thinks. The board? Charlie cut in, his voice rising slightly. Grace, this place isn't just a line item on some spreadsheet. It's where Mr. Roberts gets his breakfast every morning because he can't cook since his wife passed. It's where the high school basketball team celebrates after every game. It's where Sarah earned enough in tips to help pay for college. Don't you think I know that? Grace's eyes flashed. But I have responsibilities to the company, to our shareholders. What about your responsibility to the community? Charlie leaned forward. You told me yourself how important it was to stay connected to the people you serve. That's why you work here, remember? To not lose touch with what matters? Grace stood abruptly, gathering her purse. You don't understand the position I'm in. There are factors at play that... She stopped, pressing her lips together. I need to go. Grace, please. Charlie rose too. Just talk to me. Help me understand. She was already walking toward the door, her heels clicking sharply on the tile floor. I can't discuss this right now. I have calls to make, documents to review. Charlie followed her out into the parking lot, where the evening air had turned cool and damp. So that's it? You're just going to let them turn this place into some fancy restaurant where half the town can't afford to eat? Grace yanked open her car door. You're not being fair. This isn't personal, Charlie. It's business. Except it is personal. To everyone who comes here. To your staff. To me. She paused for a moment, one hand on the car door. For a second, Charlie thought she might turn around, might explain everything. Instead, she slid into the driver's seat and started the engine. Charlie stood in the parking lot, watching her tail lights grow smaller and smaller until they disappeared into the darkness. The neon sign of the Hearth buzzed overhead, casting its warm glow on the empty space where Grace's car had been. The morning sun filtered through the dusty windows of Walker's Auto Repair, casting long shadows across the concrete floor. Charlie lay on his back under Mrs. Davidson's old Ford truck, his mind nowhere near the transmission he was supposed to be fixing. The events from last night kept playing over and over in his head like a broken record. The familiar squeak of the shop's front door caught his attention, followed by the scent of fresh coffee. Small footsteps approached, and then Emily's voice called out, "Dad, you under there somewhere?" "Yes, sweetie." Charlie rolled out from under the truck on his creeper, finding his daughter standing there with 2 steaming cups from the corner store. Not from Hearth, he noticed. That was unusual for her. Emily handed him a cup, her eyes studying his face. "You look like you barely slept." Charlie sat up slowly, his joints protesting after lying on the cold floor. "That obvious, huh? Dad, I've known you my whole life." Emily pulled up an old shop stool, the metal legs scraping against concrete. "Plus, you didn't eat breakfast this morning. You always eat breakfast." Charlie took a long sip of coffee, letting the warmth spread through his chest. "Had a rough conversation with Grace last night." Emily's eyes widened. What happened? Did you guys have a fight? Not exactly. Charlie set his cup down on a nearby workbench. Remember that fancy car you saw yesterday? Turns out it belonged to some hotshot developer. They're thinking about buying the diner, turning it into something more upscale. What? Emily nearly knocked over her coffee. But they can't do that. What about all the people who work there? What about Sarah's college fund? And Mr. Roberts, where will he get his breakfast? A sad smile tugged at Charlie's lips. That's pretty much what I said to Grace. And? Emily leaned forward. What did she say? Charlie shrugged, reaching for a wrench more out of habit than need. She talked about business responsibilities, shareholders, profit margins. Didn't sound much like the Grace we know. Emily was quiet for a moment, her brow furrowed in thought. Then she straightened up suddenly, nearly bouncing off her stool. Dad, we can't just let this happen. We need to do something. Honey, it's not that simple. Yes, it is. Emily started pacing the garage floor, her energy filling the space. Remember when they wanted to tear down the old library? Everyone got together, signed petitions, had meetings. They saved it. Charlie watched his daughter, something stirring in his chest. That was different. The library was public property. So what? The diner might be private, but it belongs to the community too, in its own way. Emily stopped pacing and faced him. Dad, you always taught me that if something matters, you fight for it. Does the diner matter? Charlie thought about all the moments that place had held for them over the years. Birthday celebrations with chocolate milkshakes, quiet dinners after his wife passed when cooking felt impossible. Emily doing homework in their regular booth while he chatted with the regulars. Yeah, he said softly. It matters. Then let's fight for it. Emily's voice held that same determination her mother used to have. We can start small, talk to people, get them involved. Charlie stood up, wiping his hands on his coveralls. You really think people would care enough? Are you kidding? Have you seen how packed that place gets during the Sunday breakfast rush? Emily grinned. We could put up flyers, maybe have a meeting right here in the shop, get everyone together to brainstorm ideas. The more Emily talked, the more Charlie felt his spirits lifting. He walked over to his office, a small space cluttered with invoices and repair manuals, and found some blank paper. Okay, let's draft something up. For the next hour between customers, they worked on a simple flyer, Save Our Hearth, it read at the top. Community planning meeting, because some things are worth preserving. They listed the shop's address and set a date for 2 days later. Charlie spent the rest of the day talking to customers about the situation while he worked on their vehicles. Mrs. Peterson offered to bring her famous apple pie to the meeting. Tom from the hardware store promised to spread the word to his customers. Even grumpy old Mr. Henderson seemed concerned, muttering about how he'd been eating the same meatloaf special every Thursday for 20 years. By late afternoon, Emily had posted flyers all over town, in shop windows, on community bulletin boards, even at the high school. Word spread quickly in Willow Creek, and Charlie's phone kept buzzing with text messages from concerned neighbors and friends. Around dinner time, Sarah from the diner stopped by the shop. Grace knows what you're doing, she said quietly. She saw one of the flyers in the post office. Charlie's hands stilled on the engine he was working on. Did she say anything about it? Sarah shook her head. Not really. She just got this funny look on her face and went back to her office. But Charlie? She touched his arm. We're all behind you, the whole staff. This place, it's more than just a job to us. After closing up the shop, Charlie headed home. The house was quiet. Emily was at her study group. He walked into his bedroom and opened the top drawer of his dresser, pulling out an old photograph he kept there. The picture showed his wife, Linda, sitting in their regular booth at Hearth. She was laughing at something off camera, her eyes bright, a coffee cup cradled in her hands. It was taken just months before the cancer diagnosis that would change everything. Charlie sat on the edge of his bed, holding the photo carefully. "I could use your advice right about now, hun," he whispered. "Grace is special. Different than I expected, but special. And this place, our place, it needs saving. Help me do this right." The photograph didn't answer, but Charlie could almost hear what Linda would say. She'd tell him to follow his heart, to fight for what mattered, to remember that sometimes the biggest changes start with the smallest actions. Saturday morning dawned bright and clear, the kind of early autumn day that made Willow Creek shine. Charlie arrived at his shop an hour earlier than usual, pushing aside tool cabinets and dragging out every folding chair he could find. His hands were shaking slightly as he arranged them in a rough semicircle. Emily burst through the door at 7:30, carrying a box of donuts and a cardboard tray of coffee cups. "Dad, the bakery donated these when they heard what we were doing. And look." She gestured outside where Tom from the hardware store was unfolding a card table. "He's setting up refreshments. This is really happening, isn't it?" Charlie ran a hand through his hair, suddenly aware he hadn't properly combed it. "Of course it is." Emily started arranging the donuts on paper plates. "People care about this place, Dad. They just needed someone to take the first step." By 8 o'clock, people began trickling in. Mrs. Peterson arrived with her promised apple pie, still warm from the oven. Mr. Roberts, the veteran who visited the diner every morning, came wearing his old service cap. Sarah and 2 other waitresses showed up, still in their uniforms from the breakfast shift. The shop slowly filled with familiar faces and quiet conversation. Charlie noticed how different his workspace looked, filled with his neighbors instead of cars. The smell of coffee and baked goods replaced the usual scent of motor oil and grease. "Quite a turnout," Tom commented, squeezing through the growing crowd. "Must be 30 people here already." Charlie nodded, his throat tight. He was about to respond when the shop suddenly went quiet. He turned to see Grace standing in the doorway, her expression unreadable. She wore a simple blue dress instead of her usual waitress uniform, and Charlie realized this was the first time he'd seen her dressed as the business owner she truly was. His heart hammered against his ribs as she made her way through the parting crowd. "I hope you don't mind if I join," Grace said softly when she reached him. Before Charlie could answer, Emily appeared at his side. "Of course not. Here, take my chair." She practically pushed Grace into the seat, then gave her father a meaningful look. Charlie cleared his throat. "Well, I guess we should get started." He looked around at the expectant faces. "Thank you all for coming. I know Saturday mornings are precious." "Not as precious as our diner," someone called from the back, followed by murmurs of agreement. Charlie managed to smile. "That's why we're here. As some of you may have heard, there's talk about selling the Hearth." He glanced at Grace, who sat straight-backed but attentive. "We wanted to come together as a community and share what this place means to us. Maybe figure out if there's anything we can do to keep it just as it is." Mr. Roberts stood up first, his weathered hands gripping his cap. "I've been eating breakfast at that counter every day for 12 years, he said, his voice gruff. "After Mary passed, it was the only thing that got me out of bed some mornings. The staff there, they're like family now." Sarah wiped her eyes as several people nodded. Mrs. Peterson raised her hand next. "When my Arthur was sick last winter, Grace, though I didn't know who she really was then, she had soup delivered to our house every day for 2 weeks. Wouldn't take a penny for it." Mrs. Peterson's voice wavered. "That's not the kind of thing you get from one of those fancy chain restaurants." One by one, people stood to share their stories. A single mother told how the diner let her kids do homework there after school while she worked an extra shift at the hospital. A teenager described how he learned responsibility working his first job, bussing tables. The high school coach talked about victory breakfasts after big games, a tradition going back 20 years. Charlie watched Grace's face as she listened. Her professional mask slowly melted away, replaced by something softer, more vulnerable. When Tom mentioned how the diner had hosted a fundraiser for his daughter's medical bills, Charlie saw Grace blink back tears. Finally, Emily stood up. "I was 8 when we lost Mom," she said quietly. Charlie's heart clenched. They rarely talked about this in public. "Dad and I came to the diner that first week because he couldn't face cooking. Ms. Fort, Linda behind the counter, gave me extra whipped cream on my hot chocolate and told me stories about her own mom in heaven. We kept coming back, and somehow it helped. The diner became our special place." Grace stood up then, smoothing her dress with trembling hands. "I had no idea," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "When I inherited this chain from my father, he taught me to look at spreadsheets and profit margins. But sitting here, listening to all of you," she took a deep breath, "I've lost sight of what these places are really worth." "So you'll keep it open?" someone called out hopefully. Grace looked around the room, her gaze finally settling on Charlie. "The board is pushing for this sale. They say this location isn't profitable enough compared to our urban branches." She paused. "But maybe we can change their minds. Show them what makes this place special." "How can we help?" Charlie asked, stepping forward. "What if?" Grace's eyes lit up. "What if we hosted some special events? Community gatherings that would bring in business but also demonstrate the diner's value beyond just dollars and cents." The room erupted with suggestions. A veterans breakfast program, weekend poetry readings, holiday fundraisers. As people called out ideas, Sarah started writing them down on a large piece of cardboard. "We could start with a town fair," Emily suggested excitedly. "Set up booths in the parking lot, have local vendors, maybe some music. The kind of event that would look good in a proposal to the board." Grace finished, nodding thoughtfully. The energy in the room was electric now, fear and uncertainty replaced by purpose and hope. People broke into small groups, planning and organizing, while Grace moved through the crowd, taking notes and exchanging contact information. Finally, as the meeting wound down and people began to leave, Grace approached Charlie. She held out her hand, businesslike but with warmth in her eyes. "Thank you for doing this. For helping me remember what really matters." Charlie took her hand, noting how small it felt in his work-roughened grip. "Thank you for listening." Behind them, Emily wasn't even trying to hide her grin as she watched their handshake linger a moment longer than necessary. The morning sun hadn't yet cleared the horizon when Charlie pulled into the Hearth's parking lot. The diner's windows glowed warmly against the pre-dawn darkness, and even from outside he could smell the rich aroma of coffee brewing and bacon sizzling on the grill. Inside, the usual morning crew bustled about, but today felt different. Red, white, and blue streamers hung from the ceiling, and small American flags decorated each table. Sarah, wearing a flag pin on her apron, arranged fresh flowers in mason jars while humming softly. "Charlie!" Grace emerged from the kitchen, her face flushed from the heat. She wore her familiar waitress uniform despite her true status, but today it was adorned with a patriotic ribbon. "I'm so glad you're here early. We've got quite a crowd expected." "Wouldn't miss it," Charlie said, shrugging off his jacket. "Where do you need me?" "Actually," Grace hesitated, twisting her hands in her apron, "I know you're good with the grill. Our regular cook called in sick, and—" "Say no more," Charlie rolled up his sleeves. "Point me to the kitchen." The industrial kitchen was a far cry from his home setup, but Charlie felt oddly at ease among the gleaming stainless steel surfaces. Linda, the senior waitress, gave him a quick orientation on where everything was stored. "The pancake batter's already mixed," she explained, pointing to large containers. "And here's our special recipe card for the veterans' breakfast." Charlie studied the laminated card, nodding. "Got it. Basic breakfast with a few extras. Seems straightforward enough." As he familiarized himself with the kitchen layout, he heard the front door chime. Through the service window, he watched Grace greeting the first veterans. Mr. Roberts led the group, wearing his service medals proudly pinned to his jacket. Behind him came others Charlie recognized from town, along with faces he didn't know. "They're coming from 3 counties over," Sarah explained as she picked up her first order. Word got around fast. The kitchen soon fell into a rhythm. Charlie flipped pancakes and eggs with practiced ease, while Linda called out orders and kept the coffee flowing. Through the window, he caught glimpses of Grace moving from table to table, stopping to chat with each veteran, learning their stories. "Order up," Charlie called, sliding plates onto the warming shelf. 3 specials, extra crispy bacon. Around 8 o'clock, a woman in a smart blazer entered, notebook in hand. Grace greeted her warmly. The reporter from the regional paper they'd been hoping would cover the event. Charlie watched as Grace led her through the diner, introducing her to veterans and their families. "Can you believe this turnout?" Emily appeared in the kitchen doorway, having arrived to help serve. She wore a red, white, and blue bandana tied in her hair. The parking lot's completely full. Charlie beamed at his daughter while cracking eggs one-handed. "Pretty amazing, kiddo. Your idea about spreading the word on social media really worked." "Dad?" Emily rolled her eyes, though she was smiling. "Nobody calls it social media anymore, but yeah, it worked." The morning rushed by in a blur of orders and conversations. Charlie lost count of how many pancakes he'd flipped or eggs he'd scrambled. His back ached from standing, but his heart felt full every time he heard laughter or snippets of stories from the dining room. Around 11, as the crowd began to thin, Grace slipped into the kitchen. "Take a break," she insisted, touching Charlie's arm. "You've been at this grill for hours." "I'm fine," he protested, but Grace was already untying his apron. "Linda can handle things for a few minutes. Come outside with me, we could both use some fresh air." The morning had warmed into a beautiful day. They stood in the small garden area behind the diner, where someone had planted cheerful marigolds along the fence. The sounds of conversations and clinking dishes drifted through the open kitchen window, but out here, it felt peaceful. "I can't thank you enough," Grace said softly. "For everything. The cooking, the planning, just being here." Charlie shrugged, suddenly self-conscious. "It's nothing special. Anyone would have helped. But they didn't. You did." Grace turned to face him. The morning sun caught in her hair, making it glow like honey. "You know, when I first inherited this chain, I thought I knew exactly what made a restaurant successful. Numbers, efficiency, standardization. But being here, working alongside people like you." She shook her head. "I'm learning there's so much more to it. A place like this," Charlie gestured toward the diner, "it's not just about food, it's about belonging. Having somewhere to go where people know your name, care about your story. Like how you remembered Mr. Roberts takes his coffee with 2 sugars, no cream." Grace smiled. "I saw you prepare it exactly right this morning without being told." "Well, some things just stick with you," Charlie said, then added with a grin. "Like how you always save the last blueberry muffin for Mrs. Peterson on Thursdays." Grace laughed, a genuine unguarded sound that made Charlie's heart skip. "You notice that?" "I notice a lot of things about you," he admitted, then immediately felt his face grow warm. But Grace didn't seem to mind. She took a step closer, her eyes bright. "The reporter asked me why this location was special enough to save. I told her it's because of moments like this morning, veterans sharing their stories, neighbors helping neighbors, a mechanic stepping in to cook breakfast without being asked." She paused. "People like you, Charlie, who make this more than just another diner." Charlie didn't know how to respond to that. His hands, still smelling of bacon and coffee, felt rough and inadequate next to Grace's polished presence. But when he looked at her, he saw past the business owner to the woman who slipped extra biscuits to lonely customers and remembered everyone's birthday. Grace must have read something in his expression because she laughed again, that same wonderful, unguarded sound. Then, as naturally as sunrise, she reached for his hand, her fingers intertwined with his, neither of them seeming to care about the lingering scent of the kitchen. "We should head back in," she said, giving his hand a gentle squeeze. "But Charlie, thank you for reminding me what heart and time, Hearth is really about." Together, They walked back toward the diner's rear entrance, their joined hands swinging gently between them. Through the window, they could hear Emily's voice calling out more orders, the comfortable clatter of plates, and the continuing murmur of veterans sharing their stories over endless cups of coffee. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across Willow Creek's town square as volunteers strung the last of the twinkling lights between lamp posts. The Save Our Hearth festival had transformed the usually quiet space into a bustling celebration. Red and white checkered tablecloths adorned folding tables, and the smell of barbecue and fresh-baked pies filled the air. Charlie adjusted a banner that had come loose in the breeze. From his ladder, he could see the whole square filling with townspeople. Food stalls lined the perimeter, offering everything from Mrs. Peterson's famous apple turnovers to the Rodriguez family's tamales. Local artisans displayed their crafts on wooden tables, hand-knitted scarves, carved wooden toys, and pottery, all made by Willow Creek residents. "Dad," Emily called from below. "Grace needs help setting up the main stage." He climbed down carefully, his knees protesting slightly. The temporary stage, really just a raised platform with a microphone, stood in front of the diner. Grace was there, consulting a clipboard and directing volunteers. She looked different today, still wearing a Hearth apron, but paired with a pretty blue dress instead of her usual uniform. When she spotted Charlie approaching, her face lit up. "Perfect timing," she said, touching his arm briefly. "Could you help Tom with the speakers? We want to make sure everyone can hear the announcements." Charlie nodded, joining Tom at the sound equipment. As they worked, more people streamed into the square. He recognized faces from 3 counties over, people who'd driven miles to support their local diner. Someone had set up an old record player, and classic country music drifted through the early evening air. Emily appeared with a camera, snapping photos of everything: children with ice cream cones, elderly couples sharing pieces of pie, teenagers playing guitar near the fountain. "For the newspaper," she explained, though Charlie noticed she took extra pictures whenever Grace was in frame. As dusk approached, the string lights twinkled to life overhead, creating a warm glow across the square. The crowd had grown considerably, with people spilling onto the surrounding sidewalks. Charlie estimated at least 300 people had shown up. "It's time," Grace whispered, squeezing his hand before climbing onto the stage. The music faded, and conversations quieted as she approached the microphone. Charlie watched her take a deep breath, her fingers smoothing her apron, a nervous gesture he'd come to recognize. "Good evening, everyone," she began, her voice clear and strong despite her obvious nerves. "I see so many familiar faces out there, faces I've gotten to know over countless cups of coffee and slices of pie. When I first came to work at this diner, I thought I was just doing research, learning about our customers. What I didn't expect was to find a home." She paused, looking out over the crowd. In the silence, someone called out, "We love you, Grace," causing ripples of warm laughter. "The truth is," she continued, "I inherited Hearth from my father. He built this chain from nothing, starting with just this location 50 years ago. Somewhere along the way, as we grew bigger, we started focusing more on profits than people. I thought I needed to make smart business decisions until this community showed me what really matters." Charlie watched as she gestured to the crowd, to the lights, to the whole celebration around them. "Look at this. Look at what we've created together. This isn't just about saving a building or a business. It's about preserving a place where veterans find fellowship over morning coffee, where young mothers can bring their children for an affordable meal, where teenagers get their first jobs and elderly neighbors find company on lonely evenings." Her voice grew stronger, more passionate. "That's why I'm announcing tonight that not only will this location stay open, but we're expanding our community programs. We're establishing a youth mentorship initiative, continuing our veterans breakfasts, and creating a fund to help local families in need." The crowd erupted in cheers. Charlie saw Emily wiping tears from her eyes as she continued taking photos. Near the back, several elderly regulars hugged each other. "This is possible because of you, all of you," Grace continued once the noise died down. "Your stories, your support, your love for this place. It reminded me why my father started Hearth in the first place. To create not just a restaurant, but a heart for the community." The applause was deafening this time. People whistled and stamped their feet. Someone started a chant of "Heart and Hearth, Heart and Hearth." As Grace stepped down from the stage, people rushed forward to hug her, shake her hand, or simply thank her. Charlie watched as she embraced Mrs. Peterson, who was openly crying with joy. The donation box near the stage quickly filled with checks and cash as people lined up to contribute to the new community programs. The music started up again, something slow and sweet. The string lights swayed gently in the evening breeze, casting dancing shadows across the square. Grace finally made her way through the crowd to where Charlie stood. "That was quite a speech," he said softly. She smiled, looking both exhausted and exhilarated. "I meant every word." "I know you did." He hesitated, then held out his hand. "Would you like to dance?" Grace's eyes sparkled as she took his offered hand. "I thought you'd never ask." They moved to the edge of the makeshift dance floor, where other couples were already swaying to the music. Charlie wasn't much of a dancer, but with Grace in his arms, it felt natural. Her head rested lightly against his shoulder as they turned slowly under the twinkling lights. "Thank you," she murmured. "For what?" "For believing in me, for helping me remember what's really important." Charlie pulled back slightly to look at her face, wanting to say something meaningful, but words failed him. Instead, he just held her closer as they continued to dance. Around them, the festival continued in full swing. Emily's camera clicked nearby, capturing the moment. The smell of coffee and desserts wafted from the diner, where Sarah and Linda were serving free pie to celebrate. Children darted between the tables, their laughter mixing with the music and conversation. Neither Charlie nor Grace noticed Philip Marston standing at the edge of the crowd, his expensive suit out of place among the casual festival goers. His face was impossible to read as he watched the celebration, phone already in hand. He stepped away from the lights and music into the shadows of a nearby building and began to dial. The morning sun struggled to break through heavy clouds as Grace sat in her small office above the diner, staring at the legal document in her trembling hands. The corporate letterhead seemed to mock her newfound happiness, its stark black text laying out in cold detail how she had violated multiple clauses in her partnership agreement. She read the words again, each line hitting harder than the last: breach of fiduciary duty, violation of contractual obligations, immediate cessation of unauthorized community programs. The final paragraph threatened legal action to remove her from the board if she didn't comply with their demands within 48 hours. The sounds of the diner below filtered up through the floorboards, the clatter of plates, the hum of conversation, Sarah calling out orders. Everything seemed normal, yet nothing felt right anymore. Her phone buzzed. Charlie's name appeared on the screen, accompanied by a message: "Coffee's getting cold. Missing your smile this morning." Grace's throat tightened. She'd skipped their usual morning coffee, unable to face him while this crisis loomed. The festival's joy from last night felt like a distant dream now. The door creaked open, and Linda, her most experienced waitress, poked her head in. "Grace? Charlie's downstairs. Says he brought you those muffins you like from Baker's. Tell him." Grace's voice cracked. She cleared her throat and tried again. "Tell him I'm in meetings all morning. I'm sorry." Linda's concerned look made Grace turn away. Once the door closed, she pulled out her phone and typed a message to Charlie. "Need some space to handle business matters. Will call you soon." Her finger hovered over the send button for a long moment before she pressed it. Immediately, 3 dots appeared as Charlie typed a response. Grace put the phone face down on her desk, unable to watch. Downstairs, Charlie sat at his usual spot at the counter, the paper bag of muffins untouched beside him. He read Grace's message twice, confusion and hurt mixing in his chest. Everything had been perfect last night. The festival, their dance, the way she'd smiled up at him under the lights. What had changed? Sarah refilled his coffee cup without asking, her expression sympathetic. "She's been up there since dawn," she offered quietly. Looked like she'd been crying when she came in. Charlie's worry deepened. He pulled out his phone to respond. "Everything okay? I'm here if you need me." The minutes ticked by with no reply. The morning regulars came and went. The muffins grew cold. Finally, Charlie stood up, leaving a generous tip that made Sarah shake her head. "On the house today, hun," she said. "You take care of yourself." The bell above the door chimed as he left. Through the upstairs window, Grace watched him walk to his truck, his shoulders slumped in a way that made her heart ache. She wanted to run down, to explain everything, but the legal notice on her desk held her in place like an anchor. At the garage, Charlie threw himself into work, trying to lose himself in the familiar rhythm of engines and tools. But every time the shop's door opened, he looked up hoping to see Grace. By lunch, Emily found him still under Mrs. Henderson's old Buick, pretending to adjust something that didn't need adjusting. "Dad?" Emily's voice echoed in the garage. "Sarah called me. Said you looked pretty down this morning." Charlie slid out from under the car, wiping his hands on a rag. "I'm fine, sweetie. Just busy." Emily perched on his workbench, giving him the same look her mother used to when she knew he was holding something back. What happened with Grace? Everything was so perfect last night. "I wish I knew." He tossed the rag aside with more force than necessary. "She won't see me, won't talk to me. Just sent a text saying she needs space." "That doesn't sound like her," Emily frowned. "Did something happen after the festival?" "Not that I know of." Charlie leaned against the car, suddenly feeling every one of his 54 years. Maybe I misread things. Maybe she realized a small-town mechanic isn't what she needs. "Dad, stop." Emily hopped down from the bench. "I saw how she looked at you last night. That wasn't fake. Something else must be wrong. Either way, if she wants space, I have to respect that." "Since when do you give up so easily?" Emily's voice rose slightly. "Mom always said you were the most stubborn man she'd ever met, in a good way. That once you cared about something, you never let go without a fight." Charlie's expression softened at the mention of his late wife. "Your mother was a wise woman." "Then listen to her." Emily put her hands on her hips. "Grace is special. You know it, I know it, the whole town knows it. Whatever's wrong, she probably needs you now more than ever, even if she's pushing you away." Before Charlie could respond, his phone buzzed. For a moment, hope flared in his chest, but it was just a text from a customer about an oil change. The afternoon dragged on, each hour marked by the steady tick of the wall clock and the absence of Grace's usual midday visit with coffee. Dark clouds gathered outside, matching Charlie's mood. At closing time, the first drops of rain began to fall. Charlie moved through his end-of-day routine mechanically, putting away tools, counting the register, updating his bookkeeping. Emily had already gone home to start dinner, leaving him alone with his thoughts. Thunder rumbled in the distance as he walked to the front door. The rain was falling steadily now, creating rivers in the gutters and turning the world gray. He flipped the sign to "Closed" and turned the key in the lock. In the window's reflection, illuminated by the street lamp, he caught sight of himself. The lines around his eyes seemed deeper, the gray in his hair more pronounced. He looked tired, not just from a long day's work but from the weight of hope suspended and possibly lost. The same hope that had made him feel younger just yesterday now made him feel every day of his age. He reached up to touch the glass, his weathered hand matching his reflections, wondering if he'd been foolish to think someone like Grace could really fit into his simple life. The rain fell harder, drumming against the roof of the garage. Charlie stood there a moment longer, watching his reflection fade as the window fogged up from the temperature difference between the cooling garage and the warm rain outside. Charlie sat in his office, the late afternoon sun casting long shadows through the dusty windows. On his desk, A wooden box lay open, its hinges creaking slightly as he traced his fingers over its contents. Inside, his father's war medals gleamed dully: Bronze Star, Purple Heart, service ribbons that told a story of sacrifice and duty. Beside them, nestled in a faded velvet pouch, was the pocket watch. He lifted it carefully, feeling its familiar weight. The gold case showed signs of age but still caught the light beautifully. His father had received it from his own father, who'd brought it over from Ireland in 1922. For 3 generations, it had been a symbol of their family's heritage. The phone on his desk rang, startling him. It was Emily. "Dad, everything okay? You usually call when you're working late. Just doing some thinking, sweetheart." He continued to study the watch. "Remember Pop's old pocket watch? The fancy gold one?" "Of course. You used to let me hold it when I was little, but only if I sat really still." Charlie smiled at the memory. "That's the one. Why are you looking at it now?" He hesitated. Sometimes you have to let go of one precious thing to help another." There was a pause on the line. "This is about Grace, isn't it? She needs help, Emily. The corporate folks are trying to force her out, if she had enough shares." "Dad." Emily's voice was gentle. "That watch is all we have left of Pop. We have his medals, his letters, his stories that we'll never forget." Charlie's voice grew stronger. "But more importantly, we have his example. He taught me that doing the right thing matters more than keeping things safe in a box." Emily was quiet for a moment. "You really care about her, don't you?" "I do, honey, but it's more than that. It's about standing up for what's right. Your grandfather would have understood that. Then do it," Emily said firmly. Pop would be proud." After saying goodbye to Emily, Charlie carefully wrapped the watch in a soft cloth and placed it in his jacket pocket. He'd already made some calls and found a reputable collector in the next town over who specialized in antique timepieces. The drive took 40 minutes through winding country roads that were just starting to show signs of spring. The collector's shop was smaller than he'd expected, tucked between a bookstore and a cafe in the historic district. Inside, the air smelled of old wood and polish. Display cases held hundreds of watches, from delicate wristwatches to ornate grandfather clocks. An elderly man with wire-rimmed glasses looked up from his workbench. "Mr. Walker?" The collector stood, extending his hand. "I'm Herbert Mills. We spoke on the phone about the Waltham?" Charlie nodded, carefully unwrapping the watch. Under the bright shop lights, its craftsmanship was even more apparent. Herbert put on a jeweler's loupe and examined it with reverent care. Exceptional piece. 1899 model, original case, movement in remarkable condition. He looked up at Charlie. "May I ask why you're selling family pieces like this?" "Sometimes loving something means letting it go," Charlie said quietly. "Sometimes there are more important things than holding on to the past." Herbert studied him for a moment, then nodded, as if understanding something unspoken. He named a figure, higher than Charlie had expected, enough to make a real difference in Grace's fight for control. The transaction was quick but respectful. Herbert provided proper documentation and promised to find the watch a home where it would be appreciated. As Charlie left with the cashier's check in his pocket, he felt both lighter and heavier. The sun was setting by the time he pulled up to Grace's house, a modest Victorian on the outskirts of town that somehow suited her perfectly. Light glowed from the windows, and he could see her silhouette moving inside. His knock was answered quickly, as if she'd been nearby. Grace's eyes widened in surprise. "Charlie?" "I thought. I said I needed space." "You do, and I'll give it to you. But first." He pulled out the check and held it out. "The town believes in you, Grace. I believe in you." She stared at the check, then at him. "Charlie, this is... How did you? Does it matter?" "What matters is that you're not alone in this fight." Grace's eyes filled with tears. "You don't understand. The legal fees alone, and even if we win, The board. Then we'll face that too. Charlie's voice was steady. Together. If you want. She looked down at the check again, then back at his face. Something she saw there made her step back from the door. Come in, please. Her dining room table was covered with papers, legal documents, financial statements, letters from lawyers. She pulled out a chair for him, then sat close enough that their shoulders almost touched. Look at this. She pointed to one document. They're claiming I violated my contract by not consulting the board before starting the community programs. And this. She shuffled through more papers. They're trying to force a vote to remove me next week. Charlie took her hand, feeling its slight tremor. Then we have a week to fight back. Grace squeezed his hand, her voice thick with emotion. Why are you doing this? After I pushed you away. Because some things are worth fighting for. He looked at their joined hands. Some people are worth fighting for. They sat together, reviewing papers as the room grew darker, and the only sound was the rustle of documents and their quiet discussion. Grace kept hold of his hand, as if drawing strength from the connection. The check lay on the table between them, not just money, but a symbol of faith, of community, of the belief that sometimes the simplest gestures can spark the biggest changes. In the growing darkness, they began to plan their next move, their joined hands a promise that whatever came next, neither of them would face it alone. The morning sun cast long shadows across the courthouse steps as people gathered in small clusters, their breath visible in the cool air. Charlie stood among them, tugging at his tie, borrowed from his neighbor since he hadn't worn one since his wife's funeral. His work boots felt out of place against the formal marble steps, but Grace had insisted his presence mattered more than his attire. Inside the historic building, the wood-paneled courtroom slowly filled. Charlie found a seat next to Mr. Henderson, the veteran who came to the diner every morning for coffee and conversation. Behind them sat Mrs. Chen from the flower shop and the Martinez family who ran the hardware store. It seemed half of Willow Creek had shown up to support Grace. Grace sat at the front table beside her lawyer, her usual warm smile replaced by focused determination. She wore a simple navy suit, her hair pulled back neatly, but Charlie noticed she still had on the small heart-shaped pendant she always wore at the diner. Some things didn't change, even here. The bailiff called the court to order, and Judge Eleanor Matthews entered, her black robes swishing as she took her seat. The corporate lawyers from Hearth's board filled the other table, their expensive suits and leather briefcases speaking of big city power. In the matter of Thompson versus Hearth corporate board, Judge Matthews began, her voice clear and measured. We're here to determine whether Ms. Thompson violated her contractual obligations and if the board's motion to remove her is valid. Mr. Harrison, you may present the board's case. The lead corporate lawyer stood, straightening his tie. Your Honor, this is a simple matter of contract law. Ms. Thompson deliberately violated Section 7.3 of her agreement by implementing unauthorized programs and refusing to proceed with board-approved property sales. Her actions have cost the company significant potential revenue. Charlie watched Grace's shoulders tense slightly, but her expression remained calm. Her lawyer, a local woman named Sarah Chen, who'd grown up eating at the diner, rose next. Your Honor, will demonstrate that Ms. Thompson's actions not only aligned with the company's founding principles, but have resulted in increased revenue and community goodwill, assets that far outweigh any theoretical losses from declined property sales. The morning proceeded with careful precision. The corporate lawyers presented graphs showing potential profits from selling various diner locations to developers. They quoted bylaws and contract clauses, their arguments technical and cold. When Grace's turn came, she approached the podium with quiet confidence. Charlie sat straighter, remembering her words from the festival, knowing she could make others understand what really mattered. Your Honor, Grace began, My father founded Hearth with a simple mission: to create places where communities could gather, where nobody would be turned away hungry, where kindness mattered more than profit margins. She gestured to the stack of papers before her. I have here thousands of signatures from people whose lives have been touched by our diners. I have financial reports showing how our community programs have actually increased our profits while serving those in need. She pulled out a thick folder. These are letters. From veterans who found friendship at our morning coffee groups. From single mothers who could afford to treat their children to dinner because of our family discount nights. From elderly customers who found purpose volunteering at our community events. Judge Matthews leaned forward, interested. And the financial impact of these programs? Grace smiled, lifting another document. Our quarterly reports show a 15% increase in revenue since implementing these initiatives. Customer loyalty has doubled. Staff turnover has dropped to nearly zero. These aren't just numbers, Your Honor. They're proof that doing good is good business. The corporate lawyers objected, citing procedures and protocols, but Grace was prepared. She presented documentation showing how every program fell within her discretionary authority. She demonstrated how the community engagement had generated positive press worth more than any property sale would have brought. Furthermore, she continued, I have here a proposal to amend our corporate charter. She handed copies to the judge and the opposing lawyers. This would establish protective measures for community-focused locations while still maintaining profitable growth. It's not about choosing between business and community. It's about building a stronger company by strengthening our communities. The morning wore on. Charlie listened as townspeople took the stand, one after another, telling their stories. Mr. Henderson spoke about how the Veterans Breakfast program had helped him find purpose again. Mrs. Chen described how the diner had been there for her family when they first arrived in town, barely speaking English, but always welcomed with smiles and kindness. Finally, Judge Matthews called a brief recess to review all the evidence. Charlie watched Grace step outside for air, her composure wavering slightly now that all the arguments had been made. He wanted to go to her, but knew she needed these moments to herself. 20 minutes later, they all filed back in. The judge adjusted her glasses, looking at her notes one final time before speaking. This court has reviewed all evidence and arguments presented. While the board's concerns about procedural oversight are noted, Ms. Thompson has demonstrated both the legal authority for her actions and their beneficial impact on the company's mission and financial health. Charlie felt his heart speed up as Judge Matthews continued. Furthermore, her proposed charter amendments show admirable foresight in balancing corporate growth with community responsibility. Therefore, this court rules in favor of Ms. Thompson. She will retain her position and full control of Hearth, with authority to implement her proposed charter changes. The gavel struck with finality, but it was almost lost in the sudden eruption of cheers from the townspeople. Grace turned to her lawyer, tears in her eyes as they hugged. The corporate lawyers gathered their papers quietly, knowing they'd been defeated not just by legal arguments, but by the power of community itself. Outside on the courthouse steps, the morning sun had warmed the air. Town folks gathered around Grace, offering congratulations and hugs. Charlie stood back, watching her shine in this moment of triumph until she caught his eye through the crowd. She made her way to him, her smile brighter than he'd ever seen it. Without hesitation, she stepped into his arms, and he held her close, feeling the tension finally leave her body. "We did it," she whispered against his shoulder. "We really did it." "You did it," he corrected gently. "You fought for what was right. Dad, Grace." Emily's voice cut through the crowd as she ran up the courthouse steps, her school backpack still over her shoulder. She must have come straight from class. She crashed into them both, turning their embrace into a group hug, her eyes bright with relief and joy. The autumn evening cast long shadows through the windows of Hearth, but inside, Warmth and light spilled from every corner. The diner had undergone a gentle transformation over the past few months. Fresh paint in warm cream tones brightened the walls, and the worn booths had been reupholstered in deep red leather that gleamed under the softened lighting. Mason jars filled with wildflowers dotted each table, and the new community wall stretched along the back, covered with photographs that told the story of Willow Creek and its people. Charlie adjusted his collar, feeling slightly out of place in the dress shirt Emily had insisted he wear for tonight's community celebration. But when he caught Grace's eye across the room, her smile made him forget his discomfort. She wore a simple blue dress that swished around her knees as she moved between tables, checking on guests and topping off coffee cups. Some habits from her waitressing days refused to die, even now that everyone knew who she really was. "Looking sharp, Mr. Walker," called out Mr. Henderson, raising his coffee cup from his usual spot by the window. The elderly veteran sat with his usual group, their table covered with half-eaten slices of apple pie. "Grace sure cleaned you up nice." Charlie chuckled, running a hand through his gray hair. "Don't get used to it. Back to coveralls tomorrow morning." The diner hummed with life and conversation. In the corner, Grace had installed a children's reading nook with short bookshelves and cushions. The Martinez kids sprawled there now, absorbed in picture books while their parents chatted nearby. The soft twang of acoustic guitar filtered through the room. Jimmy Chen from the flower shop had brought his instrument and was playing gentle country tunes that had several couples swaying between the tables. "Dad." Emily appeared at his elbow, her camera hanging around her neck. She'd been documenting the evening, capturing candid moments of townspeople enjoying themselves. "Mrs. Peterson wants to know if you can look at her car tomorrow. She says it's making that clicking sound again. Tell her to bring it by around 10. Charlie nodded, watching as Grace made her way toward them through the crowd. She stopped to hug Mrs. Chen, laughed at something old Joe whispered to her, and patted little Tommy Martinez on the head as she passed the reading nook. "This is exactly what I always dreamed the diners could be," Grace said when she reached them, slipping her hand into Charlie's. "Not just restaurants, but real gathering places. Places where everyone belongs." The community wall behind them stood as testament to that vision. Photos showed veterans' breakfasts and children's story times, holiday celebrations, and quiet moments. There were snapshots of regulars at their usual tables, of staff members through the years, of town events and daily life. In the center hung a restored black and white photograph of Grace's father standing proudly in front of the very first Hearth location. "Your father would be proud," Charlie said softly, squeezing her hand. "You didn't just save his legacy, you made it stronger." Grace's eyes misted slightly, but her smile remained bright. "I had help." She looked around the room, taking in the faces of people who had stood with her through the fight to keep the diner. "I had a whole community of help." The guitar music shifted to something slower, and couples began to drift toward the cleared space near the counter. Mr. and Mrs. Martinez swayed together, her head on his shoulder. Even old Joe had convinced Mrs. Chen to share a dance, both of them laughing as he tried to remember the steps. "Mom loved dancing," Emily said quietly, watching the couples. She held up her camera, snapping a photo of the Henderson sisters, both in their 80s, holding hands and moving to the music like they were teenagers again. Charlie felt Grace's hand tighten in his. He looked down to find her watching him with a gentle question in her eyes. Without a word, he led her to the makeshift dance floor. They moved together easily, as if they'd been dancing for years instead of months. Grace's head fit perfectly against his shoulder, and Charlie caught the familiar scent of her shampoo, something light and floral that always reminded him of spring mornings. Around them, the diner's warm light cast everything in a gentle glow. "Remember the first time you came in here?" Grace murmured against his shoulder. "You ordered black coffee and couldn't look me in the eye." Charlie chuckled. "I was nervous. The pretty waitress kept giving me extra biscuits. I was trying to get your attention. It worked." Emily circled them with her camera, capturing moments as they turned slowly to the music. The veterans' table broke into laughter at some shared joke. Tommy Martinez had fallen asleep in the reading nook, a picture book still open on his lap. Mrs. Peterson was sharing her secret pie recipe with one of the younger waitresses. Every corner of the diner held a story, a connection, a piece of the community they'd all fought to preserve. Grace lifted her head to look at Charlie, her eyes soft in the dimmed lighting. "Thank you," she said quietly. "For what?" "For believing in me, for helping me remember what really matters." She glanced around the room. "For showing me that sometimes the best things in life aren't in business plans or profit margins." Charlie pulled her closer as they swayed to the music. He thought about that rainy night when he'd finally worked up the courage to ask her out, how nervous he'd been, how sure he was that someone like her would never be interested in a simple mechanic. He thought about all the twists and turns that had led them here, to this moment, surrounded by the warmth of community and the promise of tomorrow. Emily raised her camera again, catching the moment as Charlie and Grace moved together in the gentle light. The flash was soft, preserving the scene forever. Her father's quiet joy, Grace's peaceful smile, the love that had grown between them against all odds. Lowering the camera, Emily stepped close to her father's side. "Looks like you found our happy ending," she whispered, her voice carrying that mixture of teasing and tenderness that reminded Charlie so much of her mother. Charlie smiled, holding Grace closer as they continued to dance. Around them, the diner hummed with life and laughter, the clink of coffee cups, the murmur of conversation, the soft notes of guitar music floating through the air. This was what home felt like, he realized. Not just the building or the business, but the heart of it all. People coming together, sharing their lives, creating something beautiful from the simple moments they share. If you enjoyed the story, I handpicked this next story that you will enjoy. Please don't miss this one. Click here to watch it.